Welcome to Traveling Kangaroo. Today we're tackling a question that goes to the heart of American democracy. Why won't Congress let Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C. become states? Let's begin with a quick snapshot so you know what's at stake. Puerto Rico has about 3.2 million people, roughly the population of 19 U.S. states, and Washington, D.C. has close to 700,000 residents, more than states like Wyoming and Vermont. Together, they equal nearly 3.9 million Americans without voting senators and limited voting power in the House. They pay federal taxes. They fight in U.S. wars. And yet many basic questions about representation and fairness remain unresolved. First, some historical context. Puerto Rico became a U.S. territory after the Spanish-American War in 1898. In 1917, Puerto Ricans were granted U.S. citizenship, a move that coincided with U.S. needs for soldiers in World War I. Since then, Puerto Ricans have served in every major U.S. conflict. Washington, D.C., as the federal district, was created by the Constitution to be under Congress's authority. Over time, that unique status has left D.C. residents with limited congressional representation despite being full U.S. citizens. What do Puerto Rico and D.C. have now? Puerto Rico elects a resident commissioner to the House, a voice without a final vote on the chamber floor. D.C. has a non-voting delegate in the House and, thanks to the 23rd Amendment, a limited number of presidential electors, but no senators. So even when they pay taxes and serve on juries, they still face a reality summed up on D.C. license plates: taxation without representation. Both Puerto Rico and D.C. have, repeatedly voted in favor of statehood in referendums. Puerto Rico has held 7 referendums since 1967, with recent votes showing growing support. In 2012, there was a plurality favoring statehood. Then, in 2017, there was overwhelming support but, low turnout. The 2020 vote narrowly favored statehood, and by 2024, there was a clear majority again. D.C. voters are, even more unified. A 2016 referendum showed 86% in favor of statehood. The House of Representatives has passed statehood bills multiple times. D.C. statehood passed in 2020 and 2021. A Puerto Rico status bill passed in 2022. But every time, the Senate is where the process, unfortunately, dies. So why does the Senate block statehood? Let's, cut through the political fog and get to the main reasons. Reason 1 is political power. Adding a new state means adding 2 new senators and additional House representatives. The Senate is currently a razor-thin margin between parties. 2 more senators from D.C. and 2 from Puerto Rico would likely shift power toward Democrats. That reality turns statehood into, a raw numbers game. For many senators, voting for statehood isn't just a question about fairness. It's a vote that could change the national political balance. That makes the Senate a battleground where statehood becomes a partisan issue. Reason 2 involves constitutional arguments, mostly raised about D.C. opponents often say the Constitution requires a separate federal district for the seat of government and that this district can't be made into a state. But the constitutional text isn't as absolute as critics claim. The Constitution allows Congress to define the size of the federal district. Historically, Congress and the states have adjusted boundaries. For example, the retrocession of Alexandria in 1846 returned a portion of the district back to Virginia. A practical plan that many advocates propose would shrink the federal district to the core federal buildings: the Capitol, White House, Supreme Court, and the National Mall, and admit the heavily residential areas as a state. Congress has the authority to admit new states, and it has done so many times by statute. So this constitutional objection often functions more as a legal talking point than a complete bar. Reason 3, economics. Critics point to Puerto Rico's fiscal challenges, public debt, and higher unemployment as reasons to deny statehood. But this argument misses an important point. Puerto Rico's economic struggles are partly a result of being a territory. Territorial status excludes Puerto Rico from certain federal programs, disaster funds, and parity in benefits that states receive. If Puerto Rico were a state, analysts estimate it would receive billions more in federal support annually, access to full Medicare and Medicaid funding parity, stronger disaster aid, and other federal benefits that could stabilize the economy. In short, The lack of statehood contributes to the island's financial problems, and statehood could provide resources to address them. Now let's confront a more difficult and often unspoken factor: race and the legacy of colonialism. Puerto Rico has a majority Latino population, and D.C. is historically and currently a majority Black city. The debate over who gets full political rights in the United States has long been tangled with race. In the early 20th century, the Insular Cases explicitly said that some territories were inhabited by alien races unsuited for full constitutional protections, language that is jarring and racist by today's standards. Those decisions and the attitudes behind them helped build a framework that allowed territories to be treated differently. Many scholars and advocates argue that the resistance to granting statehood to predominantly Black and Latino populations is rooted in the same discriminatory impulses that shaped earlier policies. Let's bring in the mechanics that make change so hard: the Senate filibuster and the need for 60 votes. Even if the House passes statehood legislation, the filibuster in the Senate means you typically need 60 votes to get a bill to the floor. Given today's partisan split, statehood bills would need significant Republican support that is largely absent. This procedural hurdle turns statehood into an uphill battle with no easy path forward unless the filibuster is reformed or a supermajority of senators from both parties are persuaded. There's also the political calculus among Democrats. Some Democrats from conservative or swing states are wary of supporting D.C. or Puerto Rico statehood because of the potential backlash at home. That internal division makes a unified push even more difficult. Now, what would statehood actually change, practically speaking? For residents of Puerto Rico, full voting representation in Congress, at least 2 senators and voting House members, would replace the current non-voting resident commissioner. Access to full federal programs and funding parity for disaster relief, Medicare and Medicaid, potentially billions more each year. Full participation in presidential elections without leaving the island. For D.C. residents, the right to elect 2 senators and more full voting representation in the House. Full self-governance without Congress routinely overruling the local government's laws and budget decisions. The end to the taxation without representation slogan as a literal daily reality. Opponents counter with concerns about constitutional process, local governance structures, and fiscal responsibility. Supporters counter by pointing to democratic fairness. If you serve, pay, and contribute as an American, you should have full representation. So where does that leave us? The barrier to statehood is not purely legal, not purely economic, and not purely practical. It's political power, who gains senators and how that will affect the balance in Congress, and a legacy of racialized policies that historically left territories without full rights. The question the video leaves us with is fundamental. Should political calculations about power determine who gets full democratic representation? Or will America follow its stated principles and ensure that nearly 4 million citizens aren't left in democratic limbo? If you care about democracy, equity, or how American governance works, this is not a dry constitutional debate. It's about people's daily lives and basic political rights. Thanks for watching. If you found this breakdown helpful, make sure you subscribe to Traveling Kangaroo for more explainers and thoughtful dives into civic topics. Follow us on social media and visit our website at travelingkangaroo.com for sources, further reading, and updates. See you next time on Traveling Kangaroo.